Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Fireside Chats, Prolific Pachyderms, presented by South African expedition leaders Matt Meyer and Richard D. Gouveia. It is an absolute pleasure to have you both with us today. I'm going to hand things off to you guys.
Thanks, Kendall. What's up, guys?
Great.
We are very excited to be here today and to be chatting. That's me with a little lemur on my shoulder, and Matt is also here with us. And yeah, I've been an expedition leader for 6 years with NatHab and looking forward to chatting about rhinos. It's World Rhino Day today, so let's get stuck in. Matt, you tell them about yourself, bud.
So I'm the one without the lemur on my head again. Yeah, I've been in NatHab now 4 years. And how my relationship kind of started with that, or when I first started with NatHab, was at the very end of a fundraiser that I did back in 2017, which was kind of centered around this very topic that we're talking about today. For any of you that'll know, or any of you that know me and have spent more than about 30 seconds talking to me, know that I am obsessed and love rhinos and get involved with as many conservation things as I can. Anything to do with rhinos, basically. You can see at the bottom left-hand corner there with the rhinos behind the fence there. That was taken last week. That's with Petronel at Care for Wild Rhino Sanctuary. So they are one of the beneficiaries from that ride that I did several years ago. And just to give you a little bit of an idea how rhino conservation kind of works in certain parts of Africa and around the world. Most anti-poaching sort of facilities and units, you can see there, they're militarized, they're on horseback. They've got these intensive protection zones, electrified fences. It has become almost a war on the ground daily to help protect these rhinos. And then you've got these facilities that will safeguard rhinos. That Care for Wild, what they do is they rescue, rehabilitate, and then release orphan calves that have become orphans from either poaching or of natural causes. Rich and I were actually talking a little bit earlier, and you'll see one of the photos. There is a little calf, and this was taken. This was a photo taken on Sunday, and this little calf is just over about 2 months old. And I'll let Rich tell you a little bit more about him.
So it was a fascinating thing, because recently I went to Sabi Thabi Private Game Reserve, one of the places that we used to go on our NatHab trips. We're now next door at Mala Mala, but I went there to do some photography and some photographic workshops. And on the day I arrived, there was a female rhino that had passed away through birth complications. As the baby was coming out, the gut got twisted and she died from this hemorrhaging and the problem that came with it. And they went and picked this baby up and took it to Care for Rhinos and to this rhino sanctuary so that it can be rehabilitated and brought back in. But it's amazing that two separate stories like that come back to this. And conservation and rhino conservation has drawn a huge amount of publicity over the last few years. White rhinos were written off as extinct in the late 1800s. And then they found a very small population of about 50, which were in a reserve called Shihlui-Umfolozi. And every single southern white rhino on the planet comes from this very small genetic pool. And in Kruger National Park, which is very close to where we work, they were only introduced in the 60s, and the numbers went rapidly up to around 12 to 15,000 animals. But poaching has then taken its effect, and it now is necessary for us to be doing these conservation efforts. So Matt, tell me about the cutting off of the horns here and the benefit and what the reasoning is behind it.
So when these rhinos will come into this facility at Care for Wild, they're obviously like that little one there, very small calf, needs this intensive care. They have gone through a massive trauma, and they will be, you can see there, Petronel's got that they put, basically they would just take a dishcloth or a buff, put it in its ears, put elastoplast around it, and then cover its face with the blindfold, and it calms it right down. But then through the rehabilitation process going forward, a young calf like that he'll be bottle fed every 2 hours around the clock. They'll have a caretaker staying with the rhino. And then when they get to a certain age and they're then reintroduced into, they don't take them from this and put them right back into the Kruger Park to be poached within a couple of weeks or months or however long it is. They put them in these intensive protection zones that they have, which is a much smaller area, but it's a lot easier to manage, but it is a wild reserve. And then sort of periodically, the vets would come in and they would dehorn the rhinos. And that has become a fairly active, or played a fairly active role in the conservation of them through the private reserves, not so much in the bigger national parks, just because of the immense size of these areas. But they'll go in and they'll harvest the horn. They'll take it off about, I don't know, 3 or 4, maybe 5 centimeters from the nose, from the baseline there, and that's just keratin. It's hair, and it does no harm to the rhino not having it. Cutting it off like that, it's a little bit of stress, but not too much. They put the same blindfolds, everything like that. The animal's darted and it's sleeping. They cut the horn off and they let it go back to normal. And that is one of the horn treatments that can be done, is just completely take the horn off. But then there was another one that was done several years ago that Richard was a little bit more privy to witnessing than I was.
So basically what it entailed was the injection of an ectoparasiticide, basically a cattle dip. So it was a poison, so anyone that consumed it would have a problem, and then it was dyed. So here you can see the picture of the white is the normal horn and the pink is the dyed horn. And what they would do is they would fly a chopper, identify a rhino. At this stage, guests could pay for the experience of having this done, so it was funded by guests, and the rhino was then brought down. Again, you can see again us closing up the ears, putting this dishcloth over the eyes to calm the animal down. And what's amazing is the dart, the actual sedative that they use, if we were to get so much as 1 drop inside us, would kill us. It is incredibly deadly for us. But for these guys, it just makes them a little groggy and sleep a bit better. And then what they do is they actually go in and they drill. You can see here the guy actually has a hand drill, and they drill in and then they core out, and with a high pressure unit push in this ectoparasiticide and this dye. So the dye picks up, it's like a money dye, so it picks up in all the airports, that sort of thing. But the problem comes in is that once it's done, here you can see they put masking tape over it, duct tape there. But what ends up happening is that comes off and then it's not visible to the poacher. So the poacher doesn't care. That animal still gets shot. And unfortunately, I had to witness a few rhinos that had been killed by poachers. And it was, I mean, the tears that were shed were not great. It wasn't fun. And in this whole time, what ends up happening is it starts impacting not just the rhino numbers, but how the bush operates. Because now lions get a taste for meat. So then we had lions that were killing rhino. So I had 2 occasions where rhinos were killed by lions, and I had to then go chase the lions off the kill so that the anti-poaching units come in and remove the horn, so we didn't get poaching risk or poachers coming in to take those horns away. So it's this big to and fro, and the conservation is a big thing. Matt, I think if you can run through why are they being poached and the sort of value that we're talking about of a horn.
Yeah, and I mean, to reiterate a little bit with what Richard was saying there, with how the rest of the environment, all the other animals, then it's a ripple on of how they're affected. Because again, it's a term that's come up several times in my talks of them being a keystone species, them being the shifters and movers of environments and that. But in terms of a rhino horn there, you're looking at sort of 5, 6, maybe 7 kilos for a big rhino horn. And that can fetch up to $50,000 on the black market per kilogram. So you're looking at, I mean, the poacher never gets that. That female rhino there, she's probably got a 7 or an 8 kilogram horn. Usually, and this is, you can see this through, especially through white rhino or with white rhino, the cows are the ones typically with a much longer and pointier horn, used for defense, and then a more robust horn like that one there, often seen in bulls because they'll use them for their territorial disputes. But rhino horn being incredibly valuable at the end of the black market, it makes it attractive for poachers to come in, risk life and limb, come into these private reserves, and like Richard was saying, they don't care if there's guy in there. Even dehorned rhinos that have had the majority, 90% of their horn cut off, there's literally that much of a stub left on the top of their nose. They'll do the same thing. They'll shoot the rhino, hack into it, cut off as much as they can, and then they leave it. And another ripple on that started to happen, especially in the Kruger National Park, was that poachers, to give themselves sort of a getaway time frame, for lack of a better choice of words, they would be actively poisoning these carcasses. So they would come in, shoot a rhino, hack the horn off, poison the carcass, that any predator, particularly vultures, that come down to this carcass never leave. So they never give away the presence of these animals that have been poached. And that then ripples on, because you've got this active poison that's living in the food chain that is then consumed by other scavengers, other predators, moved potentially by vultures that don't ingest a lot, and potentially gets into water sources. And rhinos being, especially white rhinos, being as reliant and as dependent on water. I mean, if you have a look at all of these photos that Richard and I have here of rhinos, the majority of them are either like this one, they're either in next to water or covered in mud from being near water. And so they're a shifter of their environments, being that keystone species, and because they rely on water, they spend a lot of time around water, and other animals will then be on the periphery of them there.
So let's take it onto what's happening, what the poaching is doing in terms of all of this. And again, we're just trying to highlight the beauty of these creatures, but where it gets crazy is the mating. So effectively what happens is there is a massive dung pile called a midden, and it is like a Facebook page or a profile of who's been going around there. And the male has this ability to go up, and all of them have an organ on the palate called the organ of Jacobson, which they use to process the hormones within that. And when they find that there's a female in estrus, they go out to find this female. So all males will come in. So we're going to start this video here. These two males were having a little go at one another because they're trying to sort out who's going to get a chance with this lady.
Because they all would have followed. So when rhinos go through a midden, what they'll also do is a female, if she deposits, she'll deposit her dung there, and she'll scratch her feet in that dung. And so wherever she walks, as she's walking, she's leaving a sort of Hansel and Gretel breadcrumb trail along a path for these males to then follow, and to try and get as many to follow to her, so that the strongest of all of those genes can then be passed on.
And when they get there, she doesn't just mate with the first one. It takes about 2 weeks. Here you can see her giving him stick. And it's this whole process of making sure that you have the strongest genetics. So,
and he's just sitting there right now at the bar. He's twiddling his swizzle stick on his drink there with that. He's playing with the big rock. He's just like, oh no, so how are you doing? Are you so?
yeah, eventually she'll give it up. And I mean, can you imagine her? She has something that weighs over 2 metric tons, 4,500 pounds to 5,000 pounds on top of her there, trying to do his business. Now, it takes a few days. It can take 3 to 4 days of practice like this and mounting and dismounting before he gets it right. Then it's a 40-minute session where he will do his business in multiple ejaculations. And that's it. Once he gets off there, the chances of him getting back on is next to zero, and he will just carry on. And 16 months later, a little baby rhino will be part of the whole thing.
Which, might I add, are my favorite things in the world.
I mean, look at those little ears. Come on, that's just amazing. That's such a cool photo, dude.
They are, yeah. There's, and especially it's an unfortunate way that I've been able to spend as much time as I have been fortunate to spend with baby rhinos through poaching and that. But they are just the cutest, most inquisitive, and most playful little creatures. And a lot of rhino sanctuaries, careful wild not being the exception, will actually, because they sometimes might have different age groups and of rhinos that can't play together. And baby rhinos in the wild, they'll run around, they'll chase mom, they'll chase a francolin, they'll chase a guinea fowl. They'll then get a bit bigger and they'll chase this and they'll chase the parlor and chase that. And they've found that some of the best surrogates for baby rhinos are goats. And it's because of their playful nature, how they'll bounce on top of them and play with them. But one of the unfortunate things with rhinos and going in an orphanage is that very few of them, when they do grow up, get to have that imprinted and imparted knowledge from their mothers. Like you can see this one doing here. The mother's scratching her face on a stump there, and rhinos in captivity will often just through repetition just scratch on something. But she is scratching there, scratch the mud off her face, leave a bit of scent here. You often will find those around water holes. You can see the mother's there. She's covered in mud. And again, drawing us back to how rhinos will shape their environment. Being bulk grazers, they're sometimes actually quite selective in their grazing, but they are bulk grazers. But they will then, if they come to a water hole, they will then have an immediate effect on that surrounding area. So they will then decide what other grazers will be able to come into that area. And yeah, there's another image there showing 2 bulls shouting at each other.
I think, and when you're talking about the bulk grazing, I think it's important that we look at 2 very key differences, because in Southern Africa, we get 2 different types of rhino. This is a white rhino, which was named because of its wide lip, and it was mistranslated from the word wide, which is weit in Afrikaans, to white. And then the black rhino, which was called the black rhino because its name in Zulu is umfolozi, meaning black heart, because it's such a crazy creature. And he's got a hook lip because these guys browse. So the flat lip of the white rhino is for grazing, that bulk grazing of grass. And these guys will eat twigs, leaves, and special bushes, which Matt was telling me earlier. This is one of them eating a poisonous tree called the euphorbia. And the Zulus, one of the local tribes around here, they believe that poison makes them go a little bit crazy.
Yeah, it's their belief that it is that's the reason why they're so volatile as they're often known and fondly referred to by guides. The euphorbia or the tamboti, they've got a milky white latex that consumption to us would, if you enough of it, could potentially be lethal, but it'll make you very sick. And so that's what they reckon. That's why the black rhino has almost got a bit of a screw loose, is because of that consumption. But again, also very, very inquisitive in nature, very curious, and just they're playful. And black rhino, until maybe within the last 10 years, were thought to be entirely solitary, until they put up camera or nocturnal cameras at a waterhole in Etosha called Ukukuyu, where we'll see a photo of an elephant in a little bit in that same reserve, and they had a meeting area on film of up to about 17 or 18 rhinos interacting, playing, vocalizing, socializing, that had never been witnessed before. And that just shows how we've almost lost these animals now twice. We're going on the cusp of losing them a second time, or potentially, and we're still learning things about them. If you had showed this video of a black rhino approaching a vehicle to a leading rhino conservationist in the 50s, he would have, it's fake. There's no way that this happened. So we're still learning from these animals, and they've still got so much to teach us. And I mean, yeah, how close did this rhino, it looks like it almost came up and gave you a kiss.
Yeah, I wanted to give her a kiss back, Matt, but you can see she got a little spooked now and goes charging off. And black rhino are notoriously a little bit more crazy than the white rhino because of habitat, because they eat trees and twigs and leaves and that sort of thing. So they live in denser areas, and all rhinos have very poor eyesight. So that poor eyesight plays against themselves. So that one really had to get close to use its smell, its sense of hearing. We all sat quietly in the vehicle. What an experience to get so close up to them. But
man,
it's not the only thing. Yeah, it's not the only thing that they interact with. Other animals around them are always there, and their inquisitive nature means that if they smell something they don't like, they generally go towards it, and they're not worried about that because they are so big. Again, you can see a few indications, and then we had one sighting where these lions were sitting. You can see two rhinos in the background there, and then one decided to come up and say, "No, lions, we don't like you."
And because they are so big and imposing, as Richard was saying, they don't have many natural enemies. Certainly not at the adult age. Young calves and adolescents, yes. Hyenas in large numbers. Male lions in coalitions of 2, 3, 4 lions. They would be capable of bringing down a younger or an adolescent rhino. But then a pride of lions like this, there's no reason or there's no need for them to, let's try and take one of these rhino down. We'd rather just move out of the way and not risk being squashed by a Sherman tank that's run by a brain the size of an orange that can't see. That's the funniest thing about them. They're blind. They're practically blind. Their brain is about this big, and their eyeball is about that big, and they can hear very well. But I mean, that's that quintessential black rhino shot. They'll hear something, they'll put their horn up and their nose up, and then they come running, and then they just want to sniff and see what it is. And white rhino will often, when they come up, okay, I don't like you, I'm running away. But black rhinos have been known to pursue a little bit more than white rhinos, and that's where they've gotten their reputation of being they are that thick-skinned juggernaut running through the savannah and the bush that don't take nonsense from anyone, and also very, very protective over their calves.
So interactions happen to a point of anything, if everything in the bush is really about size, either size in numbers or size. So when you have an elephant and a rhino sizing up, and as Matt was saying earlier with the playfulness, watch this calf, it's so inquisitive, it wants to get close. And the other little ones are also inquisitive. The young elephants are also inquisitive, being pushed back by this little baby rhino, and then pushing back again, and it's this to and fro game that goes on. But this isn't always a good thing, because I remember my first year at Sabi, we actually had a bull in Must that came in, and Must is where elephant bulls have this heightened sense of testosterone. It makes them a bit crazy. It's like a human being on steroids, effectively. So they become a bit aggressive. They're stronger, and they're looking to get their frustrations out. And this rhino came in the path of a big bull elephant, and he just stuck 2 tusks through its side and killed it. And it made for a crazy sighting, but I mean, you wouldn't expect that an elephant would be the perpetrator of a death like that. There's no reason for it besides insanity. And what you have here, and we had quite a funny story because it was close to New Year's, and my tracker, everyone had a little bit of a session on New Year's Eve, and everyone had woken up really early for the morning game drive, not feeling their best selves, and a vulture took off and lightened its load all over my tracker's head. Needless to say, he was rather unhappy, and fortunately we were close to camp, so we went back so the poor guy could take a shower, and I went out without him. But I mean, these are the crazy things that happen out here.
Sure. No, and it's also so going back to similar to what we were describing as to how as we go into elephants here, but as to how the mother of a calf will pass on certain behavioral traits to the calf, and how, especially in herd animals like elephants, where a lot of their behavior is learned from their elders and their mothers and older bulls, etc. Young bull elephants, and this was seen in a reserve about a couple of 100 kilometers away from where Richard is in Johannesburg, in the Pilanesberg Nature Reserve. When they first introduced elephants into this reserve, they came from a fairly traumatic past, but they put all of the same age group, sort of late teens, early 20-year-olds, in this reserve to stock it from a fresh start. And they found that these elephant bulls were running around killing everything. They were killing buffalo, they were killing hippos, they were killing rhinos. And so what they did was they brought in a couple of the big old bulls from the Kruger National Park, elephants, and taught these boys some manners. And so that's one of the ways that how conservation, through movement of animals, we can get successful stories of reintroduction. But it's just an example of how these two species will ultimately interact. And yes, that is a very different one, but one nonetheless. But yeah, that's up in Etosha, where we were talking a little bit earlier about the black rhinos having their interactions. A really great place to see how water makes everything come around it, and especially in the desert here.
Yeah, so I mean, the interactions of elephants, being the biggest of all of the animals out there, is one of being a bully. And it's not even just bullying within the smaller animals. I mean, you can see all the springbok or the smaller antelope. There's some oryx at the back over here. And what they do is they'll push everyone away from the water hole while they drink. And then once they move off, they'll go along. Now, with the poaching of elephants that's happened over the years, there is a greater prevalence of tuskless elephants coming through because that genetic wasn't shot because there was no necessity for it. And what you have now is even an interaction between elephants, where an elephant that is tuskless will wait for an elephant with tusks to get in and pull the bark off of a tree. So they'll stick a tusk in underneath the bark and then strip the bark to get to the nutritious layer underneath that. And as soon as that happens, the one without tusks will push in and try and push the other one off and bully it off. So there's a lot of interaction that happens outside of just their own abilities within or within the herds and within their lives. But their habitats are also interesting. Tell me about this photo, Matt.
Yeah, that was that's in Damaraland, and you often think of deserts as dunes, but Damaraland, the desert in northwestern Namibia, is this moonscape where you can see there, but it's one of the few places in Africa that I've been where an elephant bull, I mean, that's a 6.5 ton beast, is dwarfed by his surroundings. You can see them in the Okavango Delta, which is this massive expanse. You can see them in the Ngorongoro crater. You can see them in amongst the trees in Mana pools, next to a baobab tree. Everything is it's big, but then when you go into that moonscape of Damaraland, it is just I've never witnessed anything more dwarfing to an elephant than that landscape right there. But these elephants will walk for, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 kilometers a day to get to a riverbed, to get to a dry riverbed, where they'll dig and they'll dig and they'll dig and they'll dig and they'll dig into the sand, to that underlying subterraneous water. They'll drink and then they'll walk away. But what they've done is they've created these pathways. They've then, wherever they've gone and fed on the camel thorns or whatever it is, on the seed pods of trees, and then they'll move them and they'll deposit them in and around that environment. Then when they've dug, they've created a water hole for other animals to come to. So shaping and shifting and moving that, and again, coming back to water. And that photo there in the Skeleton Coast, also in Namibia, those are those desert elephants as well. They've got the most fascinating feet. So when you look at an elephant, just you put a regular African elephant and then a desert elephant, they both look very similar. They've got a couple of internal physiological features that you won't see from the outside that aren't very different. Their kidneys are much better they're much more adapted to living in drier environments. But then you go down and you look at their feet, and the I don't know what you would call it, the platform or the footprint of the desert elephants is almost twice that of a regular elephant, and it's from walking on all of that soft sand. Did you notice that when you were in the Skeleton Coast and looking at them? It's the most weird thing.
Straight away, and it's amazing just the adaptation of it. I mean, to be that far away from water, to be creating water sources for others, but in such a stark environment was just crazy. But what I really want to get into, Matt, is I want to hear about a charge from an elephant, because as much as elephants interact with everything else, they like to interact with us at times. And as guides, because of our time out there, there's always going to be a moment where things get a bit hairy. So talk to me about a crazy situation you might have had.
I was actually, it was just a little bit after I'd started guiding, and when I first started at Mala Mala, we still had trackers, but unlike at Sabi Sabi where your tracker was on the front, our trackers would sit behind us on the back seat. And so I was driving and I was looking down at tracks on the road, and the trackers, what they would, on the back seat, I would have one next to me, and it's called a fatine stick. So it's a stick with a fork at the end of it. And then your tracker at the back has got one as well. And you're driving through brush and you can put branches out of the way from hitting your guests, and you can move spider webs and that. And the tracker would have one as well. And so I'm looking down at these tracks on the road, and my tracker just shouts. He goes, "I went low," and I look up, and there's this elephant, literally not even 10 meters away, but ears pinned, trunk up, head down, coming. Often you can never, whenever anyone asks you what happens if you get charged by an animal, it's like saying, what happens if you're in a car accident? You need to know a lot of different things, a lot of variables before you can actually describe how to do it. But there are a few key pointers with charging animals that when you understand them, you know, okay, this is not serious or this is serious. And an elephant that's got his ears out, he's got his nose up and his trunk out, it's like if you imagine a boxer going into a boxing ring, very few of them going like this. They're all going like this when they want to fight. And so an elephant is much the same. It's not going to put its ears out and its trunk out and be everything, all of its sensory organs vulnerable to then running into something. It's going to put its ears back, it's going to tuck its trunk, and it's going to protect its eyes and hit you with its brown. So this elephant was, I mean, I'd been a guide for like 6 months. I was still looking at a map, driving around Mala Mala. And this elephant came, and I put my foot on the diesel, and anyone that's ever driven a Land Rover knows that doesn't do very much. You would actually want the elephant to come from behind you so that it pushes you and you can accelerate. And I did it as quickly as I could, and I looked back, and my tracker he literally had this stick, and he swung around and whacked the elephant on the back of the head as it went past. But then that elephant chased us for probably, I don't know, maybe a kilometer or two. And we kept going. And I mean, we're driving through the bush 30, 40 kilometers an hour, and this elephant bearing down on us. And eventually we pulled away and let him go, or he let us go. But then later on that day, that same elephant had crossed the river, and he had gone towards our airstrip where we were doing transfers, taking guests to and from the airstrip. And luckily there weren't any guests in the vehicle, and it was a transport driver who was just taking the vehicle from the airstrip back to the camp, and he had a trailer on the back, and this elephant came out of the bushes, and he wasn't as lucky at getting away, and this elephant just whack took the trailer off and rolled the trailer off and just carried on rolling this trailer. And the guy, I mean, he came back white as a sheet. What happened? No, the trailer's back there, but I'm okay. So, but yeah, I've never been hit, and I've never had to do anything drastic to stop an elephant. But I mean, I'm sure you've got that one story that stands out of an elephant chasing you.
I think elephants for me are my totem animal, and I have had some of the most spiritual moments of my life with elephants, where elephants have allowed me into space with them on foot that was beyond incredible. But also, again, back to beginning stages of guiding, you working your way through. There was a bull elephant again in Must, the crazy steroids, like I'm gonna get crazy, and he chased a few people around. And I was driving down a road that had sickle bush down the sides, and we like to call the scientific name of that Land Rover flat tires, because you couldn't drive over it. You would end up with a puncture straight up.
They've got thorns like this.
Say again?
So they've got thorns like this.
Yeah, it's crazy. They puncture anything. And we're driving down the road, looking out, and we saw a herd of elephants, and we saw this bull in Must. So I said to the guests, listen, we've driven down this road quite a way. It's a long way to reverse. So what we'll do is we'll wait for him to move off. And then once we do that, we'll go past him in a bit of a hurry, so that we can get past his side. Once we past him, he won't give a hoot. And he slowly moved off, but this road ended off in a T that went into a riverbed. Now, Matt will tell you that driving in a river is not your fastest route ever, because you're in soft sand, everything just is sluggish. So the guy started moving off. My tracker, Amos, wasn't in the back. He was on the front seat, which sits on the hood of the vehicle. And he was sitting there, cool. He said, all right, let's go. Now, he was 60 years old. He'd been in Kruger National Park doing anti-poaching patrols for 30 plus years and had now become a tracker. And he was guiding me more than I was guiding anyone else, because I was a newbie. I was still wet behind the ears. So I went down the road to get past this bull, and all he did was just turn and, as Matt said, pin his ears back, roll up that trunk, drop the head, and he came. And he ran. And there was nowhere I could go. I didn't have the opportunity to go anywhere, so I had to brace and face off the charge. So we stopped. I hit the side of the vehicle. I was using 4-letter words that were absolutely, none of my guests heard them though, because they were so frightened. But I was swearing at this thing, shouting. I looked up, my tracker was gone. Nowhere. Off the front seat, he'd run off into the bush. I thought to myself, good, great. Nah, this guy has abandoned me. Now, the elephant is all of about 6 feet away from the vehicle. As he stopped, because I stopped and hit the vehicle or hit the side, I was making this clanking noise. His skid, all the dust hit us. I remember that feeling of the stones and everything being picked up as he skidded. And now I'm stuck there. I'm shouting at him. I'm doing everything. I'm thinking to myself, this guy is going to flatten us. The next thing, a boulder the size of my head comes flying over the vehicle and hits him in the head. And my tracker had run off and fetched these rocks. And this elephant, who'd stopped at a distance that he thought was comfortable to stare me down, suddenly got this fright because he was now being hit without knowing why. Yeah, in the front. I promise you, he pinned him right between the eyes. It was ridiculous. And this eventually, the elephant, after the third rock, decided, no, he's out. And he went trumpeting off and crushing trees and going through. I was done. I was sweating. I turned around to see where my guests were. I've lost my tracker. Now I want to see my guests. The whole one side of the vehicle is gone. Everyone is sitting on everyone else's laps behind me. So the whole vehicle is actually tilted at an angle because of the weight distribution. And the worst is then I have to try and drive, but I can't because my foot on the clutch, because all the vehicles are stick, was shaking so much that we kept on stalling as I was trying to pull off. It was absolutely crazy. Absolutely.
And Amos is probably sitting there with one of those sickle bush thorns, picking his tooth, and he's as cool as the cucumber, just saying, "Ah, no, it's fine."
Yeah,
it's fine.
he was yeah, fine. Exactly. He was giggling. But you know, the interactions then start going another way, where I had a situation where we had 2 hippo bulls fighting, and you have these massive agglomerations, especially when water holes and things are getting dry, where hippo bulls will fight. And one of the guys was so badly injured, he was lying in a riverbed, a dry riverbed, trying to just recover, but he was on the edge of death. And an elephant bull just walked up and wiped him out. So I don't know what other things. I mean, you've seen some pretty cool pods of hippos up in East Africa. Talk to me about these massive pods.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So in Uganda, they've got some pretty dense populations there, but they're very concentrated in small areas. Here in the Mara, it's huge river systems. With when the rivers dry up, all of these pods that would have been spread over several dozen miles of river frontage get pushed into 2 swimming pools, and wow. And they'll spend the majority of the day outside and on the riverbanks, and then it's not as hot during these months because it's the winter months, it's the drier months, but then they'll go into the water when they're scared. We literally came over the lip of a riverbed, didn't expect to see this group here, and they all went thundering down into the pool of water. But here, when those pools dry up, because hippos spend so much time in the water, and they'll often defecate in the water, they sully these water holes, and so they create these unusable watering holes that no animal is going to come down and drink from, because it's putrid. It's undrinkable water. So that is, but then these hippos will go from one to the other, and they'll carve out these game paths and create these little micro ecosystems around their water holes by excluding other species. And so they've got a very interesting interaction with the species that they share their space with. You can see them. They've got these giant teeth. It's almost like a rhino is a Sherman tank run by an orange. These guys are a train with giant spears sticking out of their face. I mean, look at that. That's just, and they only eat grass. I mean, it's the most bizarre thing. You would think that an animal that's going to be fashioned with those giant teeth would at least hunt elephants. But I mean, they literally hunt grass, and very well. These guys, they've got very muscular lips, and they don't even use their teeth to eat the grass. They use their lips. So they munch it like a rhino. They'll munch it like a rhino. These are purely defense, territory, etc. And defending themselves. Again, you can see there, so at the top right of that picture, that's not a hippo that's shedding its skin. That's probably the oldest animal that's living, walking the earth right now. That looks like it's about a 400-year-old. No, that's probably one of the bigger crocodiles you're ever going to see. I mean, it's the size of a hippo. It's a good over 100-year-old crocodile. And so hippos would have to defend their calves against these guys. I mean, these ones, these in the Meyer River in Kenya are known to be some of the biggest in the world, because they get this constant supply of meat coming through every year in the form of 2 million wildebeest.
Now, when I look at that croc, it reminds me of a story where we had a hippo that had been pushed out of the main Sabi River system, and it was living in a smaller dam in front of a lodge called Earth Lodge, and there was also a big croc in there, about 15 foot long croc, and a waterbuck, a type of antelope, came up to have a drink. The croc grabbed its belly and opened its belly up, but it lost its grip on it, and the waterbuck moved off. But it was now this young waterbuck was in shock and everything, and the croc then came out to try and get it, and as it did, the hippo just came out and chased the croc away. So there's these weird interactions that are going on, and I'm sure that there's a few of you asking, but you know, do the hippos eat do the crocs eat the hippos? What's the story? But they live a pretty good life. They don't interact too much with one another until one of the hippos dies, then it's a feeding frenzy for the crocs.
Yeah, they're just kind of, they are the meat eater and the vegan living symbiotically together, and no one messes with the other until there's a big patch of grass that's for sale, and then it's game on for the hippo, and then he's going to win, because yeah, he's thick-skinned. He's one of our pachyderms. Their design is to just be in that water. I mean, you can see that little one there. It's got all of its sensory organs. It's got ears, eyes, nose, all on top of its head, so that it can just sit there and float in the water. The Afrikaans name for a hippo is a seekoe, which means a sea cow, because that's what they do. They just sit and laze around in water all day. But the most dangerous animal in the African bush. And funnily enough, rewind a couple of weeks ago to the Big Five webinar, where the Big Five is the 5 most dangerous animals in Africa to hunt. Hippos kill more people than any of the Big Five. I mean, I think there might have been a time when accumulatively hippos killed more than the rest of the Big Five, but most people overlook them, and they're just these big things that sit in water all day.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think that's about where we're going to leave this for now. And Kendall, I think if you have any other questions for us from the guys, we're happy to attack those and add some answers for you.
Yeah, we've got some great questions for you, and I'd like to remind everyone watching that if you have a question for Matt or Richard, you can submit those in the questions field in your control panel. All right, there's lots of questions about rhinos, by far the most popular animal of the day. So there were some questions about when you remove the horn of the rhino. First is, what defense does the rhino have left once it's removed?
Pretty much it's its bulk. But most of the time when rhinos are dehorned, it would be a dehorning of the entire population. So if you were to leave half with the horn and dehorn the rest, then you would have a big problem with rhinos killing each other. But that horn is mainly for the females to ward off pursuing males that might get a little bit too aggressive with their calves, to try and push them away so they can mate with the female, and then the males to fight one another. So if the entire population have all of their horns removed, they don't really pose much of a threat or much need for defense against one another. And then for all other attackers, or all other harm, it's their bulk that they would then use.
And what do they do with the horns after they're removed, and how long does it take for a horn to grow back?
So the typical idea of horns, and there are two gentlemen in South Africa that actually farm rhino, and they have been storing the horns in safes. So like the horns that I was talking about that I had to chase the lions off in order for the anti-poaching units to come and remove the horn, those horns then went into safety deposit boxes in very big armored secure areas because of their value. And these two gentlemen that are farming them, there's a lot of backwards and forwards going on because they want to try and legalize the sale of them, because they're sitting on millions upon millions upon millions of dollars worth of horn. So a rhino grows about 4.5 pounds of horn every year. So it's like fingernails. And all they do is that rubbing that they do when they do their bits and pieces, they're actually removing part of that. So it's like them cutting their nails. So if they stop the rubbing, they would grow continuously.
And there were some questions about the injections that the rhino horns get that you were talking about earlier in the presentation. Can you just speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the ectoparasiticide, what the idea was to try and put off people actually consuming it. There was a court case where somebody from China that had ingested it had died because of the poison inside of the horns and wanted to sue our government because of it. So the idea was to try and slow the poaching and say to people, well, it's not fit for consumption, and push that whole idea out of there. So that was the idea. But like I say, there was nothing visible on the outside to say there's stuff inside here. So they would shoot them and still take them across anyway.
Okay. And a black rhino question. Do they ever end up playing with vehicles, and are they really, truly unpredictable?
Yes, they are. I don't know. This is like, so Richard said that the elephant was his totem animal and his spirit animal. Mine is this guy here. Black rhinos to me that's the the biggest enjoyment I can get on foot in the bush is spent with these guys, however brief or however exhilarating and scary it might be. But to play that's more sort of anthropomorphization than usually is that they're just very curious and they're very inquisitive, and they will often, black rhinos will, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, and the white rhino, it's easier to ask for permission than forgiveness. And so a black rhino will come in inquisitive, guns blazing, see something, I don't like it, I'm going to put my horn into it, whereas a white rhino will go, oh, I don't like it, and run away. And so more often than not, nothing really comes of an interaction with them. They'll charge and they'll run away. But I mean, certainly when darting them from helicopters, guys have their stories of rhinos charging at helicopters. So you've got this massive woof, 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 above you that's coming to dart you, and you're trying to charge at it. So it's that tenacity and determination that separates them from the white rhino. But I think it's just that their curious nature, and black rhino is just a little bit more volatile than white rhinos, and willing to follow through with the charge gives them their reputation.
And which rhino species is the most critically endangered right now?
That must be India.
Well, in Africa, so you've got the white rhino and the black rhino, and the northern white rhino went extinct 2 years ago, with Sudan, the last viable male, passing away in 2018. And then the western black rhino went extinct a little while ago as well. The desert adapted black rhino is the numbers are increasing, but still critically endangered. But out of the two African rhinos, the black rhino is higher on the endangered species list, with about 5,500 or 6,000. And the white rhino, I think the numbers are estimated are sort of 10 to 14,000. But then the most endangered worldwide, it's a kind of toss up between the Javan and the Sumatran, both of which have less than 100 known individuals left in the wild, and that's in the Javan, Sumatran, the Lusa ecosystem in Southeast Asia.
Wow. Last rhino question: how are orphaned rhinos taught how to be rhinos if they don't have a mother to imprint and learn from?
Man, I'm going to leave that to you, but you've done so much stuff with this, so please take that.
So Care for Wild actually had a surrogacy program where they had rhinos that were given to them from other reserves that were raised as wild rhinos, that these young rhinos then, once they are big and old enough to interact with, will then be released into that intensive protection zone, and then they'll learn to interact. But not all of their behavior is imprinted. A lot of it is instinct. And they are a very genetically simple creature, like Richard was saying earlier, with the entire genetic stock of rhinos, southern white rhinos that are left in Africa came from less than 100 in one area. And that's through them evolving over an entire continent over the better part of 1 million years. So a lot of their behavior is instinct. Some of their learned behavior is obviously predators and mating and all of that. And those things you won't teach in an only rhino protecting sanctuary. So they don't have those natural predators to worry about when they are the size of this young rhino. Even up until when they're 2 or 3 years old, they don't have lions trying to hunt them where they need their mum to defend them, or they need 3 or 4 of them to ward off those lions. And when the time comes to breeding, that's when those older surrogates who have been imprinted upon and do know what it's about will then play that role and teach and imprint those behaviors on them.
And so we'll end on this question. There's always a lot of curiosity about the mass elephant deaths in Botswana, and could you guys give us a little update about that?
So I saw yesterday on BBC that they had worked it out that it was a cyanobacteria that had a neurotoxin inside it. So it's an actual type of bacteria that grows in water sources, and with the increasing heat and global warming, these cyanobacteria are able to proliferate, and they believe that that is the cause of the death of these elephants. They don't know how far it spread. It's still strange to me that it only impacted the elephants and that there weren't other animals that were impacted by that, because elephants aren't the only ones that are going to use that water source. So I think there's still more that needs to come into that, but it is a great question, and I'm still waiting for more conclusive proof that it was exactly that.
Okay. All right, well, it is after the top of the hour, so I'm going to call it there and turn it back over to both of you for closing comments, and we'll start with Matt.
Thanks, Kendall. And yeah, thanks again, folks, for tuning in today and showing the support on World Rhino Day, September 22nd. Again, a cause very close to my heart. And thanks to NatHab and the WWF and for putting on these daily dose of nature that keep everyone engaged in nature and keep us on our toes and doing things like this and talking about it and sharing the word and spreading the word of conservation. So thanks, Kendall. Thanks, NatHab and the WWF.
Thanks to all of you for tuning in and listening today, and happy World Rhino Day. I think there was a lot of good conservation stuff that came out of today's talk. There's a lot more that's going on behind the scenes, and these guys need as much help as what we can give. Thanks, NatHab, for hosting it, and WWF for all their stuff. And Matt, thanks for your time and joining me and helping me through this whole thing. Have a wonderful day, guys, and stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to hear from you guys. Thank you for taking the time to present for us again. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have that replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, Kendall. Thanks, guys.